Hello, my name is Kate Hudson Hall, and thank you for listening to Bulimia Sucks. So this is a platform for people to share relatable, uplifting, and inspiring conversations based on bulimia, anorexia, and other eating disorders, and talking about people's victories and their challenges. And these are real stories from people who are suffering or have suffered an eating disorder. And episodes will include their personal stories of where they are now and their difficult journeys and their steps taken into their recovery, and also to professionals who work with people with an eating disorder. Now, I'm very excited to welcome our guest, Dr. Ann Saffi Biasetti. Now, Ann has been practicing psychotherapy for over 29 years, so a very long time. She specializes in somatic psychotherapy and is an eating disorders specialist. She has a PhD in transpersonal psychology and is licensed as a clinical social worker. She is a certified mindfulness teacher, mindful self-compassion teacher, and a certified yoga therapist. And she is the author, speaker, and teacher of self-compassion and somatic interventions in eating disorders. Now, her first book, Befriending Your Body, a self-compassionate approach to freeing yourself from disordered eating, was released through Shambhala?
Shambhala. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let me read that again. So her first book, Befriending Your Body, a self-compassionate approach to freeing yourself from disordered eating, was released through Shambhala Publications in August 2018. And her most recent publication, The Awakening Self-Compassion Card Deck, 52 practices of self-care, healing, and growth, will be released through Shambhala Publications in December this year. How exciting, Ann.
Yes.
So welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you very much for having me on. I'm excited to be here with you.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So, well, I want to hear all about your cards and your book, but let's start off, first of all, with the beginning. So you started sort of what guided you towards becoming an eating disorders therapist was the fact that you had anorexia yourself.
Yes.
Yeah. So tell us.
Yes and no. So kind of.
Okay.
So I was going to say kind of maybe a funny path to that too. So yes, I did go through having anorexia as a teen, starting at about age 16, I would say 16, 17. It was after the death of my father, which was a pretty traumatic death that was sudden, but not sudden, meaning that he was kind of sick for a couple of years and the death was pretty traumatic. So at that point in time, I had no idea what was happening to me. This was in the 80s. And here in the States in the 80s, there was, I'm going to say probably everywhere at that point, there was very little help to be found. There was very little understanding of what an eating disorder.
Because when I had my eating disorder, it was in the 80s.
Yes.
But there wasn't any help. And the books out there, and I say this, the books out there were just like all writing, and it was so hard. It was so kind of academic, I think, in a way, but they're really difficult to read. But particularly if you're like engulfed in your eating disorder, it was really
difficult. Especially as a young person, you know, you really didn't understand what was happening. All I knew was that I felt some horrific grief and that I felt sick every time I ate, right? My body felt sick every time I ate, right? And so I just, you know, slowly began to turn away from food, and my body began to suffer in ways I didn't even understand. You know, I stopped menstruating. And then, of course, I went to the GYN, who was very critical and shaming and did not understand anything. I don't even think he once asked me about how I ate or didn't eat. And he certainly never asked me about or brought up what just happened in my life, that I lost a parent and the changes going on in my life. And I was about to launch into college then and whatever. So there was none of those questions were even asked. It was just I remember it being a very medically shaming, appointment.
Oh
And
gosh, how
so
difficult.
so yes, exactly. So,
Yeah.
those years kind of fast forward into how did I even know what I was going through? It was once I got to college, and actually I was majoring in counseling, in my undergraduate degree. And so I was very academic, perfectionist student, no surprise there, right? The typical personality trait that comes along, with most eating disorders, right? Especially anorexia. So there I was always reading up on academic books, and articles, things that I could educate myself with outside of school. And I found myself in the library, my local library one day, and I actually picked up a book on eating disorders. Now, it was exactly like what you were saying, one of these very academic, clinical books.
Yeah.
But what it did is it outlined the symptoms, right? So I
Right.
stood there in the library and I read the list of symptoms and I found myself starting to cry. And there I was, probably 18, 19 at the time. And I was crying in this library and I saw myself in every one of those, very clinical symptom checklist. And what struck me in that moment was not, oh boy, like I have this or something like that. What struck me instead was the thought, oh my goodness, am I doing this to myself?
Oh, you remember thinking that?
Yes. So what struck me was, is there something that I'm doing that may be doing this?
Oh,
And the thought and idea of, I don't want to hurt myself. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to cause myself something or my body something that was harmful. And it was a strange, like it almost sound, it was like kind of like a higher level,
yeah.
voice, right? That because I really did not like myself at the time at all, right? I was very self-critical and I part of me didn't care, but then all of a sudden there was this part that cared, right? So I can swing back around to that when I talk about all the work I
So
do
that's
now.
really interesting. So it's the realization that you're actually doing it to yourself.
Yeah, well, it was this realization. Now I want to really put a disclaimer out there that in no way ever do I believe that someone with an eating disorder is doing this to themselves. Absolutely not. This is something that has so many multiple
Yeah.
reasons and factors, right, for being born. However, the interesting part was the part that said, but I don't want to harm myself. I
Yeah.
knew that what I was doing was harmful,
Right.
but the larger voice was the one that said, but wait a second, I really don't want to be doing this.
Yeah.
So that was the one that I started carrying. Right now, that was, the eating disordered brain, voice was a lot louder, trust me, and that went on for years. But with that little other voice that I would come to understand later on in years what that was, right? It was my self compassionate, my internal self compassionate voice, right? That would show up, it would show up in ways where I remember a college scene where took a summer class that I absolutely loved with these professors that I loved. And we were a really small group. And at the end, they ordered a bunch of pizzas. Now, I hadn't had pizza for years and I'm Italian and I loved pizza. I grew up on pizza and I hadn't had it in years, but there was something about that atmosphere, being with those really fun people, great professors who really I looked up to and who gave me a great deal of, accolades, because I was such a great student and what have you. And there was something about that moment and that voice that came in that said, you don't want to be hurting yourself anymore, that allowed me actually
Right.
to join in and eat that pizza with all the others in that moment. And that was a pivotal moment for me.
Yeah.
Because as anyone with anorexia or any other eating disorder knows, there is a moment there is a moment that speaks to that internal self-care, right? That speaks to that part of self that says, but wait a minute, I do care, even if it has been so clouded over by years of not caring and years of maybe even hating, right? There is this tiny little seed. I call it professionally now, I call it the seed of self compassion.
Yeah.
And there's something that awakens it. And for me, it was that silly clinical book and being with people that I knew saw me and really saw me, not just the eating disordered me, but saw me and saw, guess what? My potential.
Yeah.
And it was those professors that saw my potential. They knew what I was going through, but never once did they say to me, "What's wrong with you?" They only kept seeing my potential.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is such a powerful piece, as I say to all clinicians that work in this field, and I train a lot and supervise a lot of clinicians. I say, you must always see someone's potential. Never give up
Absolutely.
seeing someone's potential, right? Because they may not have it at that time,
Yeah.
but that's what we hold for our clients, right?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
hold their possibilities,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So how I came to working though in the field was, when I went on for my master's and then got my first clinical job, well, I should say not my first, probably years later, I was working in a clinic, community clinic. And at that point in time, the director of the clinic just started. I kind of wonder to this day if she may have known maybe what was in my history, right? Even though I never said anything to her, she just started referring a lot of eating disorder cases to me. And at first, I was a little taken aback, like, oh, I don't know how close I want to get to this, right? As a clinician,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's what and here's the layers of recovery. Why? Because at that point I was in my mid-20s and I was totally behaviorally recovered, meaning I was eating all my foods that I wanted to eat. I was no longer restricting. I was no longer weight obsessed. However, this still wasn't entirely clear, meaning there were a lot of mind moments, a lot of thoughts that still weren't clear for me, still weren't free. And the biggest part was a lot of freedom. Even though I wasn't weight obsessed, I was extremely still weight conscious.
Right.
And so there was not freedom in the body, right? So she kept referring these cases to me. And there's one thing that I did end up noticing, even though a part of me felt very incompetent in many ways to deal with, this clientele, because I wasn't sure, can I help them? The one thing that I did notice is how much I could relate
Yeah.
and how much I enjoyed working
Right.
with the folks. And it was a big piece of understanding what is it that I was relating to. I was absolutely able to relate to their pain and their struggle and their suffering, and able to also really witness, wait a minute, I'm still partly there with them.
So
And it
that's interesting, isn't it? So, right. So at that time, you could still identify within yourself
Mhm.
what they were saying or yeah. So where they were
Exactly.
coming from.
Exactly. And it kind of, as a clinician, listen, we're taught to
Yeah.
always self-reflect, right? And we're taught to really understand our what we call our countertransference, right? Which is what's arising for us.
Yeah.
So, I'm glad in so many ways that I witnessed that, because that just, made me more curious, self-curious about, wait a minute, I'm told out in the world there, in the mental health world, that I'm recovered, but I knew there were other layers that weren't touched yet
Yeah. Yeah.
and that weren't being touched. And I had to find what those were. So it sent me on my own deeper personal journey, to really, really explore what it means to be healed, not just recovered, but what it means to be healed. What is
Yeah. As a whole.
as a whole, exactly,
Mm.
which we're often not taught. I was not taught that in my clinical training. We're taught to focus on behavioral management, and little is there taught about how to start working with the mind states
Yeah.
and and nothing taught on how to work with the body,
Yeah.
how
And
to
the
integrate
connection
the
between the
body
two.
and the connection. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us more about that and how you work with your clients
Hmm.
with regards to that connection.
Sure. Yeah. So really a holistic recovery, the way I like to describe it to everyone is, or how do we befriend the body, right?
Mm.
Is we start to understand that again, we are not separate from this body, meaning that this body is this really amazing vehicle, right? This really amazing vehicle that is filled with wisdom that can inform us what is happening and what we need and what we don't need. And it's such an important journey to take. Um, that sounds like really big words, but if we're going to bring it down to what does it look like in treatment, right, in therapy, as a somatic psychotherapist, really what I'm asking folks to do is learn how to begin to turn toward their internal bodily sensations for information that has to do with their nervous system, information that has to do with their energy level, which we call, when we start paying attention to things like energy level and what does our heart rate feel like even in this moment, or is my breath choppy, is it free, is it even, those sorts of internal messages teach us so much about the state of our whole being in that moment.
Yeah.
And where this is so important for in relationship to eating disorders and our relationship with food is that when our nervous system is kind of hijacked, and
Yeah.
we can tell that through our breath and our heart rate and our tenseness in our body, things like that, our eating disorder behaviors really were just nervous system management. That's all they ever were. That's all they ever were. But
Right.
the thing is, if we're taught to work with the food first,
Yeah.
but if we don't work in here
Yeah.
first, the food is always going to remain our greatest
Yeah.
companion because at one point it helped. It helped before it hurt,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So this brings in the other deep layer, which is self-compassion. So when I teach my clients about the internal workings of their body and what happens in their brain and everything else, their nervous system, inevitably we sit there, and I have a kind of a little famous statement in my recovery program that I teach. I have an 8-week recovery program, and we after I teach the first week on this kind of information, we come out with a statement of, out of fairness, you
Right.
know out of fairness, with all of this has been what I've been trying to manage, and I've always been looking out there to try and manage it.
Mm, mm, mm.
And so what I'm saying is, okay, now that you understand this, let's be fair. Of course, these things have been ruling your life, but now let's see if we can slowly turn toward what's in here, the sensations, and starting to learn how to work with those and regulate them and help our body to feel safer and our whole nervous system to feel safer.
Yeah.
Then what happens? Then what's available? What's possible, right?
Yeah.
It comes
Yeah.
back to that what's possible again. So, I think it's really a disservice and really unfair to clients with eating disorders to start with the food first and try and take away something that has been helping to manage all of this without teaching them how to manage all of this.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I like to start with the body, and then we go to understanding and working with building resiliency around really tough emotions, because all of that has to go together,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, we go to any stories that have been locked in the way, right? Because we all know that's part of it. But in the somatic work, we start with the body, we start with emotions, and then we can better understand the story that's been entrapping us.
Right. Right.
That's a
And
backdoor approach. We call it a backdoor approach or a bottom up approach. When we work with the body, we call it, Dan Siegel coined that term many years ago, the bottom up approach. So we don't work from a top down as somatic psychotherapists. Top down is more of the cognitive and behavioral work, and we work from the bottom up because this changes once the body changes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you explain further about how you would work with the body?
Yeah, so it's really simple things, such as when my clients come in the room, if I notice, which this pretty much runs the full gamut for everyone, they come into the room and they're really jacked up, right? Their nervous system is really hyper aroused, and I can see that. And so I don't want to start talking to my clients when their nervous system is like that, because I know that they're going to be hijacked by a lot of the same obsessional thought patterns. They can't help it because their nervous system is hijacked at the time. So in that
Yeah.
moment, I do a simple grounding practice. Let's just take a moment, I say, and we're both going to do this together.
Yeah.
Right. And we take a simple grounding practice, take maybe a little bit of movement. One of my favorite things to teach as a yoga therapist, because I bring in a lot of my yoga therapy interventions as well. So one of my favorite things to teach is just a simple release breath. I have it written all throughout my book. Take a release breath, just a simple breath in through the nose and an exhale through the mouth. And use your arms too. Movement helps to organize the brain. So anytime my clients, if they're talking about something and they're working up or they're starting to check out,
Yeah. Yeah.
dissociate,
Yeah.
right? And they can feel that. So I've taught them to pay attention, and we start to describe what that feels like to either go up here or to
Right.
collapse.
So they can recognize it.
That's right. Excuse me. So they can recognize when those two states are happening. And as a somatic psychotherapist, I'm not going to ignore that when I see that happening in my room, right? So we're not going to continue to talk. Rather, we're going to stop in a moment like that. And I'm going to check in. I'm going to say, well, let's you and I do something to come on back together until you can feel yourself back with me. And, I have many different interventions that I use. And then once they're back with me, then we can go on. So the psychotherapy becomes a model in and of itself of what I'm asking them to do out in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Yeah. So Anne, tell me, so if somebody was thinking about recovery and they were to that point where they were very unsure about whether to take that first step onto the pathway of recovery, what would you suggest? What would you advise? What help would you suggest for them?
Yeah. So really what I highly encourage is doing exactly like what we're doing here, Kate, which is listening to podcasts, starting to read some books, right? Starting to follow recovery positive folks, that they're all over social media now and what have you. But really starting to let in from the outside the people who are telling you it's possible. Right? Exactly like you're doing here, and that you do with each and every podcast, right? So really starting with that, because someone is not going to take the first step unless they believe there is hope.
Yes. Yes.
And hope can come from many different places. Like I said, it can come from that book on a shelf, like I found. It could come from listening to a podcast. It could come from talking to friends. I highly encourage people to break the silence. That's an enormous first step in the path.
Yeah.
So it doesn't always have to come, even though I love people to reach out to professionals, it doesn't always have to come from that direction, right? It can come from it can come from a beautifully compassionate doctor.
Yes.
A doctor's appointment where someone says, unlike the one experience that I had as a young girl, it can come from a beautifully compassionate doctor that says, are you okay? You know, it has to come from something or someone that you relate to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, that you can relate to and that you feel is speaking to your innermost care. That's the self-compassion.
Yeah. Yeah. And so for your book, Befriending Your Body,
Mhm.
so this sort of would take somebody, because I haven't read it yet, but I would
Mhm.
like.
Yes.
So it would take them through and explain, obviously in great detail, about the steps of how you would work with your clients.
Yes, well, the book was based actually on my doctoral research. So I was a clinical social worker for 20 years, and then I went back to get my PhD in transpersonal in psychology with a transpersonal concentration about 8 years ago. And at that point, I researched what the role of self-compassion was for it was specific to women, but really it applies to anyone working through an eating disorder. I wanted to know what the role of self-compassion was that helped them sustain recovery. So not just touch behavioral recovery as I did as that young girl in those years, but sustain recovery and reach a whole different level with it, meaning
Right.
reach a level where they felt free.
Yes.
Now that's a long haul, right? Because we don't often hear that in the world of recovery, unfortunately, right?
No.
So the book, the book is really a breakdown of what the findings of my research were, which because it was a qualitative research study,
Yeah.
really what it unfolded was a process or a path of self-compassion through each stage of the recovery process.
Wow.
So it takes you through kind of from stage one. The first chapter is called Feeling Broken, because I think because that was a word that came up most often
Right.
as
Your
people
research.
described themselves and described what it felt like in their body and in their mind in that very beginning time.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I heard the word. I just felt lost. I felt broken. I felt severed. I felt completely cut off from myself, right?
Yeah.
So it takes you from that stage into the very last chapter of the book is on self-love.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So it takes
Yeah.
you really through this self journey. It's really through how do we go from feeling broken to feeling self-love.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes that takes a lifetime. As I tell everyone in the self-compassion work, I am less concerned about self-love. I'm more concerned about self-compassion.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, because part of the findings too was the more we can be self-compassionate, the more self-love will grow.
Right.
So
Right.
I like people working with what they feel is more doable and accessible,
Yeah.
which is, let's see, self-love. Oh, can I love myself or can I just be kind to myself?
Yeah.
And most people find that even though that's even hard, especially in the beginning of stages of recovery, that, well, I think that's a little more doable than fully loving myself right now. And I want people to understand that self-compassion is good enough and just as good
Yeah.
to help you sustain recovery enough to move toward freedom.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
Mhm.
And so what does freedom mean to you?
So freedom to me means allowing my body to guide me in the movement it wants to take or not take, meaning that I don't feel compelled to do
Right.
any kind of forced movement in my body for any reason.
Yeah.
It means that I can wake up and, excuse me, think the night before, oh, I want to do a yoga practice in the morning, but I wake up in the morning and my energetic body, right, is telling me that I want to sit and meditate instead.
Yeah.
And I make that decision in the moment
Yeah.
based on discerning, right, what my body is telling me. And it means the same thing with food. It means that I allow those same internal messages to guide me in my food choices
Yes.
and what I desire in the moment and what I don't desire in the moment. So I even that is guided not by what my head wants, right, by what my mind wants, but really what I'm enjoying and what I want in that moment, both for my body and also what would fulfill me, fulfill that part of me that says, I want a little more of that, or I want something sweet now, and not letting, unfortunately, those old messages that were part of the eating disordered messages, right, come in and say, oh, you can't have that. There's no good or bad to foods in my life,
Right.
and there's no right or wrong to them.
Mm. Mm.
There's just foods that either fulfill me more and sustain me more nutritionally
Mm.
for longer periods of time,
Yeah. Yeah.
and those that may not. So true freedom to me is not being bound or controlled by any one thought or behavior.
That's interesting, isn't it? So it's being completely calm and relaxed and at one with yourself, your whole being.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is, I say this very carefully too, because it is not just a journey, but it's a lot of work. I want everyone to understand that that didn't magically happen. That's not where I was at in my 20s, It wasn't where I was at even when I started having my children in my 30s. As a matter of fact, it was in my 30s that after having my children that I was propelled into my deeper yoga practice.
Right.
And it was the practices of yoga. And then I went on to train, for so many hours in yoga. And yoga therapy is a lot of extensive training and meditation. So it's by no accident that where I'm at now, like I say, it's I don't say like, oh yes, this just happened. No, this is with great, fierce self-compassion, fierce practice and effort.
And determination. Yeah.
And determination. Yeah. So basically, everything that I, was propelled with in the harm, unfortunately, in those early years, I turned toward the healing, right? So it was almost like that same energetic quality. How did it get turned around?
Yeah. Yeah.
And as it got turned around, now at this point in my life, I'm 53 now, I can sit here and say I will always be a fierce protector of my body. It's kind of like what I tell my clients when they come through the door. They may be saying to me, well, Dr. Ann, I feel fine, and I say, well, until I hear from your body that your body's fine, I'm a protector of your body first here. Because I know you can't see it. So that's my job,
Yeah.
So I'm a fierce protector of my body, however you want to call it, I, make sure and if I'm sensing or feeling something, my doctor knows. She's like, oh, I don't care, you know your internal self very well, so I will speak up. I will say what I'm noticing. I will ask for another test if I need to, right? So that, like I said, none of that came by any accident. That was very, very determined practice and effort. And it's possible because guess what? The things that I'm practicing in, right, that have brought me here end up feeling really good too. There are things that have anchored my life.
Yeah.
So I don't feel hijacked all the time. So that's the reward too, you know.
Yeah.
There is a reward.
Yeah. And that freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Anne, now tell us about the Awakening Self-Compassion cards.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh,
So we I know I'm so excited for this
I'm excited.
project. Yeah, it was actually so much fun for me to write these cards because they really came, I feel, from the heart, very naturally to me. They are 52 cards they're open to anyone. So not just those that are struggling with an eating disorder, but really for anyone who is looking to engage in and with self-compassion and learn more about how to integrate it into their lives. So these 52 cards are meant to be practiced with one a week. And you can practice with the same one for a couple of weeks, or you can just take them one at a time for a week. And on the front of the card, there is a little teaching about self-compassion, so you can come to understand little parts of different varied teachings that are there. And then on the back of each card is an embodied practice, so kind of what we were talking about. How do I engage my clients in their grounding? How do I engage my clients in noticing and being more compassionate toward themselves and their bodies? So on the back of the card is a little practice and little mantra.
Fantastic idea.
Yeah.
So there's a little practice. So
yes.
have you got so could you give us maybe an example of one?
Yeah, well, boy, I'm trying to, it's so funny whenever same with writing the book. And I think you could speak to this as an author as well. I wrote the book, put it down, got it published, right? And people ask me about it. I'm like, oh, I have no idea. I think that's on page 30, you know? So one of the practices that I have is, the front of the card actually talks about the words that I said earlier. What is fierce self-compassion? Kristen Neff, who is one of the co-creators of the Mindful Self-Compassion program, she coined the term, fierce self-compassion. And that fierce self-compassion is actually the part of self-compassion that is the doer, right? It's the action-oriented part of self-compassion. Right. And it's really, really very much what we need in recovery, right? We need that fierce self-compassion. So the front of the card teaches you about that action-oriented self-compassion, or what fierce self-compassion is about. And the back of the card actually invites you into a posture in your body that actually feels fierce in that moment. So I have folks, on the back of the card, I have an example of what is it like to take a warrior position in your body. Most people who know yoga know the warrior pose. So I introduce you into a variation of warrior one pose, to just close your eyes for a moment in this posture, and feel what it's like to have those shoulders drawn back. Feel what it's like to have the arms lifted and the chin slightly lifted, ready to embrace, going forward in the world. Feel what it's like to have your feet planted, right? Planted to the ground, as if the ground is bringing you the absolute ability to sustain and hold and be with this moment exactly as it is. So it's just these tiny little embodied practices, even for a moment, that take the words that are on the front and say, oh, I see, this is what the words actually feel like in the body. Right?
I see.
Yeah. So they're fun.
So it's taking those words and tuning into your body.
That's right.
Exactly what that would feel like.
That's right. Exactly. So I'm a big one with working with words with my clients, to have them embody, right? So sometimes we do practices. There's another one where actually there's a card that I write about the difference between self-compassion and self-love. And one of the practices on the back is to just embody the words of freedom, right? The word, so self-love really is freedom, isn't it? Right? Self-love really is like, wow, I'm in this acceptance now, I'm in this place of really understanding myself and knowing myself. So what's it like, to move to the words of acceptance, to move to the word of joy, to move to the word of easy
Mm.
or ease, right? To
Mm.
let your body move to the word of, strength and compassion, right? So everyone has their own place that will land for them, right? Everyone would move their body. When I do this in a retreat, let's say, because I do these practices, in a large group of people, it is beautiful to
Mm.
watch
Mm.
how everyone has their own embodied expression of those words. They mean different things to everyone here,
Yeah.
and so that's what some of the cards offer, are those kinds of embodied felt sense
Yeah.
of the words that are on the front.
What a fabulous idea. And what
Thank you.
an incredible learning for people.
I hope so. I hope that they'll be, that they will offer, as we're saying here, Kate, that maybe they'll offer the first step
Yeah.
for someone in just understanding, in a gentle way, understanding themselves a little bit deeper, right?
Yeah.
And maybe that's their first step of reaching out.
Yeah. And so I take it that they'll be on Amazon.
They'll be everywhere. Yep. As a matter of fact, this month, as of today, I guess, as of June 1st, they are available for pre-order. And Shambhala Publication, they will be releasing a 30% coupon code pretty soon in the next couple of weeks, to buy directly from them. People can pre-order with this coupon code that will be coming out through them pretty soon. And they're going to be kind of putting that out there.
Oh, amazing. And then in December, that's when it goes live, when they go
Yes.
live for sale.
Yes. In December is where it will be all over. Yeah. Available anywhere, any bookstore and all, which is a really nice gift too. I always say that I do see these as being a lovely gift. I know I'm getting one for all three of my young adult kids.
Absolutely.
Because I keep saying, in our world today, who doesn't need some more compassion, right? And compassion. So.
Gosh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Anne, where can people find you?
They can find me through my website, which is either through my name, or you can look up the website is anembodiedlife.com. So it's ANEMBODIED life.com. It's
Right.
Embodied Life. Same with Instagram and Embodied Life, and same with Facebook and Embodied Life. And then you can also find me through my name on any of those as well.
Yeah.
So
We'll have all the links below anyway for people.
I'm sorry, Kate, what's that?
We'll have all the links below.
Oh, yes, thank you. Yes, thank you. Yes, and on my website too, there is a page of that's called free resources. And I love to put, I have lots of different meditations on there that are all these types of meditations, all these embodied meditations. And I have a restorative yoga practice that's for free on there. And this podcast will be linked there, and other podcasts that I've done. So there's lots of free resources there that people can also check out and hopefully receive some guidance or some help with.
Oh, fabulous, Anne. Fabulous. So I normally start at the beginning of the podcast with a funny story, but we're going to end today with a funny story. Have you got a funny story for us?
A funny story. Well, I was sharing with you before we came on that my life has had a lot more joy in it since I had got a puppy a year and a half ago, and this was supposed to be my empty nest puppy. And then, of course, during COVID, all three of my young adult kids were back in the home, which was actually great because my husband and I were really happy about that. But this is a English Golden Cream retriever, and she is just not only adorable but very funny personality. So I'll just tell the cutest story. For the other day, I heard a noise happening in my kitchen. I was like, what is that? And I look over, and she is blowing bubbles in her water bowl. So she has her whole nose in the water bowl and blowing bubbles. And I thought maybe she was doing this by accident. And I called her name. She looks up at me, it's all dripping down, and she puts it right back in and blew a bunch of bubbles more. So this seems to be her new favorite thing, but she just cracks me up each day. So she's a lot of joy and a lot of fun to be with now that I miss having little kids.
Yeah. Oh, what fun. What fun. Well, thank you so much, Anne, for sharing your journey and sharing all of your learnings. And I'm sure that people can take away so much from this podcast. And I hope that they'll be able to come and, and tune into maybe your free resources and learn more, and be able to, what they find to be able to help them and take that little step onto their recovery.
Sure hope so. Yes, I hope so. And you could always, I love to hear from people too. So you can always reach me by email as well. If there are any questions about any of this, I'm always happy to answer as well.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
And thank you everybody for joining us again on Bulimia Sucks. And make sure that you subscribe to the podcast on Apple iTunes so you never miss an episode. And also, if you haven't already heard about it, check out my book, Bulimia Sucks, on Amazon to learn many different techniques to help you to begin to break through your painful bulimic behaviors. And also, my Bulimia Sucks audiobook is launching on June the 27th. And if you'd be interested and you would like a copy of this, please email me at katehudsonhall@gmail.com, and I can send you a code in order for you to be able to download it from Audible, or Amazon, or iTunes for free. So let me know and I can send you the code. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to speaking to you in the next episode.